You ever get that moment when you finally find a pipe laser that looks perfect on the listing, only to discover it's a pain to set up, drains the battery before the job's done, or forces you to climb down into the trench more than you'd like? I've seen a lot of contractors stare at a sleek-looking laser on a screen, click Add to Cart, and then spend an extra hour or two wrestling with a bulky unit that just isn't built for the tight space measurements they need. That's why I'm doing this deep dive, to help you avoid the guesswork and make sure the tool you bring home actually saves you time and frustration on the job site. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the kind of work where a pipe laser really matters. I'm talking about installing or inspecting sewer lines, storm drains, or any underground conduit where you need to know the exact invert elevation. In those scenarios, you're usually crouched over a trench, sometimes in a confined pipe, and you need a reference line you can see without having to crawl down repeatedly. That's the sweet spot for the Topcon L6B accurate pipe laser. It's marketed as a compact, red beam laser that lets you take tight invert measurements without the usual hassle of pulling a bigger level into the pipe. What sets this model apart is how it leans into the real-world constraints of a job site. The unit is small enough to fit through a 2-inch opening, which means you can drop it into a pipe without needing a separate tripod or a long extension arm. That alone cuts down the time you spend rigging equipment before you even start measuring. The 60-hour battery life is another practical win. I've seen job sites where the laser is left on all day, and the battery still has enough juice to finish a second day of work. That longevity comes from a rechargeable battery that Topcon also uses across a handful of its other site tools, so you can swap the pack between a laser, a total station, or a grade control device without buying a separate charger for each. It's a small ecosystem benefit that many manufacturers overlook. The remote display via Topcon's mobile app is a feature that feels more like a convenience than a gimmick. When you're standing at the edge of a trench, you can pull up the app on your phone, see the current laser height, adjust the reference point, and even switch between measurement modes without having to climb down and fumble with the unit's buttons. In practice, that means you can keep both hands free for tools, and you're less likely to lose your place when you step away from the pipe for a minute. It also eliminates the need for an extra handheld display that would otherwise add weight to your kit. Now, let's get honest about the drawbacks. The TPL6B is a Class II laser with a 4.5 milliwatts output, which is perfectly adequate for most underground applications, but it's not as bright as the Class III models you might find on the open-air construction market. If you're working in a very dimly lit trench or in a pipe that has water or debris floating in the line of sight, the red beam can become hard to spot. You'll either need a separate laser detector or a flashlight to keep the beam visible, which adds a tiny extra step. Also, because the unit relies on a smartphone for its remote interface, you're dependent on a compatible device and the app staying updated. I've run into a situation where a firmware update on the phone caused a brief disconnect, forcing me to restart the laser and recalibrate the height. It's not a deal breaker, but it's something to keep in mind if you prefer a completely standalone tool. Who should consider buying the TPL6B? If you're a plumbing contractor, a civil engineer, or a municipal worker who regularly measures pipe inverts in confined spaces, this laser hits the sweet spot between portability and functionality. The long battery life means you can set it up in the morning and keep it running through multiple jobs without swapping batteries. The ability to share one battery across other Topcon gear is a cost saving if you already own, say, a total station or a grade controller. And the remote app means you can stay out of the trench longer, reducing fatigue and exposure to potentially hazardous conditions. On the flip side, if your work is mostly above-ground grading, site layout, or you need a high-visibility beam that can cut through bright sunlight, you might be better off with a different class of laser. The TPL6B's red beam isn't optimized for daylight use, and its compact housing doesn't have the robust mounting brackets you'd find on a larger rotary laser meant for long-range leveling. In that case, you could end up paying for a feature set you never use, like the interchangeable battery, while missing out on the brightness you need. Let's walk through a typical day with the TPL6B to illustrate the practical strengths.